years ago, Indian Point requested and received an exemption that cut by more than half the amount of protection required for electrical cables used to shut down a reactor in case of a fire. Governor Cuomo nailed it when he said, "So if the transformer fire had spread, my question is, what could we have done? They had trouble putting out the fire. A fire spreading at a nuclear plant, you have a very real problem." Ya think? This fire places a new level of scrutiny on the Spectra Energy gas pipeline, which is being proposed to be built virtually adjacent to Indian Point. Linda Puglisi, who is town supervisor of Cortland, a town next to Indian Point, said that the gas pipeline should be scrapped after the Indian Point accident. She said, "If this explosion and fire had been in close proximity to this new expanded gas line, it could have been a disaster." There's a terrific article by Carl Grossman up on counterpunch.org. It's called "Our Nuke is Burning." We'll have a link to it up on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under this episode, number 203. And last word on Indian Point, there is an alarmist video going around online that talks about Indian Point blows up. Sorry, guys, it's an alarmist piece. It is a gross exaggeration, and really, the problem is bad enough. We don't have to get dramatic and make it sound worse. But wait, there's more bad news for nukes on the East Coast. The Oyster Creek nuclear power plant in New Jersey remains shut down for the 5th day as of Monday, May 11th, as staff work to solve the electric problem that sent it offline. The shutdown took place last Thursday night, the same day as the Indian Point transformer fire, and the NRC said on Friday that the trouble originated from a main electric transformer outside the reactor building, the same as at Indian Point. Oyster Creek is the oldest nuclear power plant in the country, having opened in 1969. Owner Exelon announced in 2010 that it would close the plant in 2019, which would be its 50th year in operation. Nah, put it out of its misery. Shoot it now.
Point 2 nuclear power plant on Lake Ontario offline this morning because pumps that circulate water through the reactor shut off while being shifted to a lower speed. Now, the reactor was not affected and remains at 100% power. The plant has been operating at about 78% power since last week as crews made repairs to the feed water heating system. It will remain shut off until all repairs have been made.
Shut it down forever now. In Ohio, a steam leak at Davis-Besse shut that nuke down on Saturday night. And just downstream from 3 Mile Island on the Susquehanna River, biologists have confirmed the first case of cancer in a smallmouth bass. Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission biologists say they've observed sores and lesions on many smallmouth bass in surveys of the river since 2005, but this is the first confirmed cancer. Meanwhile, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to revise how it assesses foreign ownership of U.S. nuclear facilities, making it more possible for countries other than the United States to own and or control nukes on our soil. But what could go wrong? This week, the U.S. House of Representatives approved over $300 million for a mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility. Try saying that 5 times real fast. At Savannah River site in South Carolina. Despite calls from watchdog groups to gut a program that has fallen far behind schedule, exceeded its budget, and has no real customers. But other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, what did you think of the play? In 2004, construction for the site was estimated to cost $1.6 billion and was expected to be completed by 2007. But now, more than $4 billion has been spent on construction, which is only 67% complete, and the site has lost its contract with its only real customer, Duke Energy. That happened in 2008, and they haven't been able to find a replacement buyer for the fuel product yet. Didn't they do any marketing research before they built this thing? Where was Shark Tank when we needed them? A new congressionally mandated report estimates that the life cycle costs for this facility will skyrocket to more than $114 billion. And in order to complete the project, we'll need at least $500 million a year. As Kevin O'Leary would say, don't throw good money after bad. I'm out. You're dead to me. Would that it were that easy. Let's take it away from the nuked out east and bring it to southeastern Utah, where radon releases have been found to skyrocket at the White Mesa Mill. New data reveals that emissions of radon, a radioactive, invisible, odorless, cancer-causing gas, from the White Mesa uranium mill exceeds Clean Air Act standards by over 50 times the legal limit. According to Sarah Fields, Program Director of Uranium Watch, for decades, the EPA claimed that the radon emissions at uranium mills were zero, so did not need to be determined or controlled. We now know that radon emissions are significant and must be monitored and controlled under CAA hazardous air pollution standards. Manuel Hart, tribal chairman from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, said, "Given the mill's vicinity to our White Mesa community, we are very concerned about the difference between the high levels of radon-222 emissions calculated by our environmental department and the low levels assumed by regulators." Indeed, despite being informed of the data in early February, neither EPA nor the Utah Department of Environmental Quality have formally responded to the Grand Canyon Trust and Uranium Watch's concerns, nor have the regulators taken any enforcement actions to protect public health from the radon emissions released from the White Mesa Mill liquid wastes. Anne Mariah Tapp, Energy Program Director for the Grand Canyon Trust and a former nuclear hot seat interviewee on number 200, said, "We consider this a potential public health emergency and are alarmed and disappointed by EPA's refusal to, at minimum, disprove our respective calculations." She went on, "Instead of taking immediate action, EPA continues to stall while public health hangs in question." And kudos and a Xena Warrior Princess Award to Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman, who says that she would lie down on U.S. Highway 95 to stop the transport of uranium waste through her city. "I find it absolutely incredulous," the two-term mayor said while mangling the English language in a good cause. "This is just not tolerable." The uranium waste is expected to pass through Las Vegas on its way to a landfill at the Nevada National Security Site, 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Federal officials are not expected to make the shipping schedule public, apparently derailing the mayor's threat to head off the transports. Yeah, but it's a great gesture. Last month, when Arnie Gunderson, chief engineer at Fairwinds Energy Education and one of our brightest lights, spoke at the World Uranium Symposium, he talked about significant amounts of Fukushima radiation having been detected on the west coast of North America. He said, "Last week, Woods Hole announced a study that showed about 7 becquerels per cubic meter of radiation had reached the west coast of North America. They called it trace amounts. I don't call 7 becquerels per cubic meter a trace amount. That's significant and measurable, and it's just the beginning of the onslaught." Arnie went on to explain, there was a study in 2012 that predicted how much radiation was going to get to the west coast of British Columbia. It was 29 times lower than what Woods Hole actually measured. So scientists have no clue about how to measure what's transporting through the ocean. Studies 2 years ago are already wrong by essentially a factor of 30. The scientists' real goal, Arnie said, was to downplay the significance of the damage to the Pacific Ocean. And speaking of the oceans, as the U.S. government continues to play head in the sand about the ongoing devastation to marine life in the Pacific, U.S. universities have begun testing animals for Fukushima radiation. Colorado State University is testing trace radiation samples in seal populations in the northern Pacific Ocean. And subsistence harvested ice seals and walruses are being tested by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Marine Advisory Program. Thus far, they have found disease conditions for the first time in the reproductive systems, endocrine, musculoskeletal, intergumentary, that means connective tissue, respiratory, and digestive systems in ice seals and walruses. But that's not the end of our nuclear woes for our waters, because
nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, nuts out awake.
Well, it gets no nutsier than this. A panel of experts, and you know what I think about experts in the nuclear world, these experts concluded that it is perfectly safe to bury hazardous nuclear waste material only 1.2 kilometers, meaning 3/4 of a mile, in a site near Lake Huron. Yes, our Great Lakes, the largest basin of fresh water in the world. And now Canada, of all nations, has decided that it's okay to risk radiologic contamination of the drinking water for so many million people I can't even find the number in front of me right now. But a Canadian environmental assessment concludes that burying the hazardous nuclear waste material near the shore of Lake Huron is the best way to deal with the waste. No, the best way to deal with the waste is not to make it in the first place. The 430-page report concludes the relative position of the proposed project within the spectrum of risks to the Great Lakes is a minor one, and the project is not likely to cause significant, I hate the use of that word that the nuclear industry loves so much, not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects. I wonder how much it costs to get that conclusion out of this crew. More than 152 communities in Canada and the United States have condemned the plan. Beverly Fernandez with the group Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump expressed deep disappointment with the panel's recommendation that the project be approved. Fernandez said, "This is an intergenerational, nonpartisan issue that affects millions of Canadians and Americans. It is a decision that will affect the Great Lakes for the next 100,000 years. And the last place to bury and abandon radioactive nuclear waste is beside the largest supply of fresh water on the planet." Sane Canadians who understood the danger found themselves represented in the statement of Mayor Kenneth Hobbs of Thunder Bay in Ontario. He said, "I think it's a boneheaded move. You could see the lake almost a stone's throw away." Then he added, "I think it's just the wrong location." You know, you're right. And what's the right location? How about one of the many sub-basements of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? Or Prime Minister of Canada Stephen Harper's bedroom, stored in unused space in Canada's Parliament, anywhere but not on the shores of Lake Huron. And that's why Canada, dudes, guys, wake up. You are this week's and possibly the next 100 millennia's
nuclear hot seat, nuts out awake.
In Japan, the bird population has been found to be in a tailspin 4 years after Fukushima, with mutations showing up that cause birds to be born blind and unable to fly. Dr. Tim Mousseau, professor of biological sciences at the University of South Carolina, reports that most organisms that he and his crew have examined show significantly increased rates of genetic damage in direct proportion to the level of exposure to radiation. Many organisms showed increased rates of deformities, developmental abnormalities, eye cataracts, and even tumors and cancers. Musso went on to say that bird species and abundances are in sharp decline, and the situation is getting worse. A story doing the rounds on the internet seems to be good news, but bears closer examination. The headline from May 11th reads, U.S. restricts food import from Japan over radionuclide contamination concern. And it appears to include a list of Japanese food that will be banned. This is undoubtedly being released at this time because of recent food scandals in Taiwan, where food from banned prefectures in Japan have been found to be part of the food supply, and also with the recent discovery of higher radiation levels in food in Hong Kong that have been imported from Japan. But is this release from the FDA anything meaningful? According to Fukushima Fallout Awareness Network's Kimberly Roberson, this is not new, meaning the release of this list of the FDA seems to be saying it's going to ban. She says, FDA has put this on their website since 2014. The issue is what they consider to be acceptable, which is 1,200 becquerels per kilogram, which is not acceptable. By contrast, food in Japan that contains more than 100 becquerels of cesium per kilogram is illegal to be sold, which means that it's perfectly legal to export to the United States, and it will come in under our limit of 1,200, which, as Kimberly likes to point out, is a recommendation, not a hard and fast law. And in Taiwan, another scandal, as Moe's Burger, a Japanese burger chain, is busted for using restricted Fukushima food in Taiwan. One of the sauce mixes used by the chain was labeled as being produced in Tokyo, but was actually produced in Tochigi Prefecture, one of the prefectures under food import restrictions. The company will be fined for false customs declarations by the Taiwanese government, but not for exposing its customers to the possibility of internal contamination by radionuclides. And the forest fire near Chernobyl that broke out over a week ago has spread radionuclides, notably plutonium, over Eastern Europe, Asia, Alaska, and is now moving in over the west coast of the U.S. According to a simulation that uses actual winds, not predicted winds, smoke particles from the Chernobyl fire have moved over southern Alaska, northern British Columbia, northwest Washington State, Salinas, Fresno, and Santa Barbara in California, and Las Vegas. As of Friday morning, May 5th, the rain outside of Fresno had some measure of this smoke plume mixed in with it and was falling as snow in the mountains to the northeast. There goes Sequoia. We'll have our featured interview in just a moment, but first, nuclear radiation invisibly impacts our food, water, air, and as a result, our health. To help learn the best possible ways to protect from radiation's assault, I've worked with Kimberly Roberson, a veteran anti-nuclear activist and certified nutrition educator, to develop a program that explains the best practices we've been able to identify and verify to protect, as best possible, from radiation. It's called WRAPT, which stands for Radiation Awareness Protection Talk. We have a free WRAPT report available for Nuclear Hot Seat listeners at raptawareness.com. That's R-A-P like Peter, T like Tom, awareness.com. When you sign up, you'll also receive regular email updates on food, water, and health issues, as well as products, services, and detoxification protocols that can help you protect yourself and your loved ones. To get your free report and start learning what you can do to best protect your health from radiation's negative impact, go to raptawareness.com. Dr. Celine Marie Pascal is an Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies, College of Arts and Sciences at American University in Washington, D.C., as well as Professor of Sociology and Affiliate Professor for the School of Communications. She studies language research to examine issues of culture, knowledge, and power. I first became aware of her and her work when enenews.com ran a story about a paper she presented at the International Sociological Association's World Congress last year. She covered aspects of the media coverage of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster that those of us in this movement suspected and complained about, but we couldn't prove it. She, however, did more than 2 years of analysis and came up with the data to prove the points, especially the framing of the concept of risk to people after Fukushima. I was very excited to track her down at her office in D.C. and interview her for this show. Celine Marie Pascal, welcome to Nuclear Hot Seat.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start out with giving the listeners a sense of your background.
I'm a sociologist at American University, and I'm interested in issues of language and knowledge. I study language use to understand the kinds of assumptions that people make in their daily lives that often reproduce systems of inequality.
What first got you interested in studying media coverage that took place in the wake of the start of the Fukushima nuclear disaster?
I began noticing in my own casual reading that the media didn't cover the nuclear disaster in ways that I might have expected. And a little bit like what happened after Hurricane Katrina, that there was a way of reporting the natural disaster that really minimized what was going on and the social decisions that created the disaster itself around the levees. And so I wondered if something like that was happening with Fukushima. It seems like we weren't getting quite the whole story.
From my perspective and that of people in the movement, we couldn't agree with you more. When did you start turning this into research, and how did you proceed?
2 years after the disaster, I began collecting newspaper articles, media coverage from the Huffington Post, Politico, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. I collected everything that they had printed about Fukushima in the 2 years between the start of my data collection, which was the second year anniversary, and the beginning of the disaster.
What specifically were you looking for or looking at?
As a sociologist, what I do is a systematic study to identify patterns. So I came into it thinking that it would be very interesting to look at how risk was constructed. How did these various media construct the notion of risk, and how did it get particular kinds of meaning? And that began a really long coding process that I used NVivo, which is a systematic online way of looking for where the word risk might appear or associated words, and then going from there more deeply into the articles to understand how they were being used, what was the context of their use.
So when you say you were looking for risk, you were actually searching for that word in the context of articles and news stories about Fukushima?
Exactly. There is so much data here that what I wanted to focus on for the first article out of this data is just the construction of risk with regard to the general population. I was really surprised when I saw how rarely that was discussed in media. So I think that out of